My husband was stealing our company, with my assistant. They framed me for millions, and they thought I'd just go to jail quietly. They underestimated me. At the merger signing, I didn't expose them. I destroyed them. The penthouse view was a tapestry of steel and ambition, glittering under the Los Angeles smog-hazed dusk. Below, the city pulsed. Up here, in the rarefied air of Hart Dynamics, Helena Kane felt the familiar thrum of impending victory. The Viridian merger, months of intricate negotiation, sleepless nights dissecting balance sheets, and strategic pivots conceived in the quiet hours before dawn. It was her masterpiece, even if the world saw only Damian Hart's dazzling smile plastered across the business journals. "Final checks, Helena." Damian's smooth voice cut through her focus. He leaned against the doorframe of her office, radiating the effortless charisma that opened doors and wallets. His tailored suit probably cost more than Helena's assistant's monthly salary. "Almost," Helena replied, her voice steady despite the knot of tension tightening in her shoulders. She gestured towards her monitor, displaying complex financial models. "Just verifying the liquidity projections for Vantage Corp's due diligence team. There's a slight anomaly in the Q3 discretionary funds allocation. Minor, but needs reconciling before the signing ceremony." Damian waved a dismissive hand, his smile never faltering. "Details, my love. You always sweat the details. That's why I need you." He crossed the room, planting a perfunctory kiss on her temple. His cologne, expensive and woody, usually a comfort, suddenly felt cloying. "Vantage is sold. Elias Frost practically salivates over our market share. This," he swept his arm towards the skyline, "is our crowning moment, our legacy." The emphasis on "our" rang slightly hollow. "Legacy requires clean books, Damian," Helena countered, her eyes flicking back to the screen. The anomaly wasn't minor. It was a tiny, deliberate burr in the otherwise flawless fabric of the accounts, a transfer flagged with her departmental code, routed through an obscure holding company she didn't recognize. Only someone with CFO-level access, or intimate knowledge of her protocols, could have seeded it. A cold prickle traced her spine. Later, seeking caffeine and clarity, she headed for the executive kitchen. She paused outside the ajar door. Damian's low murmur, followed by a soft, familiar laugh. Chloe's. Not the professional, clipped tone her assistant used with her, but something warmer, intimate. "Just a few more days, sweetheart," Damian was saying, his voice thick with a tenderness Helena hadn't heard directed at her in months. "Once the ink's dry and the cash hits, we vanish. Maldives first, then wherever the wind takes us. No more boardrooms, no more Helena." Helena froze, her hand tightening on the doorframe. Ice flooded her veins. Chloe's voice, breathless with excitement, cut through the silence. "And the frame? Solid?" "Rock solid. By the time they discover the discrepancies next week, she'll be scrambling, discredited. The board will have no choice but to remove her before the final handover. We'll be untouchable, darling. Free." The world tilted. The polished granite floor seemed to lurch beneath Helena's feet. Betrayal wasn't a sharp knife. It was a slow, crushing avalanche, burying her under the weight of her husband's duplicity and her assistant's treachery. Not just an affair. A conspiracy. To frame her, to steal her work, her reputation, her future, and vanish with the spoils. She retreated silently, the cheerful chatter from the kitchen morphing into grotesque background noise. Back in her office, the sanctuary now felt like a beautiful trap. Panic threatened, a raw scream clawing at her throat. She choked it down. Crumbling was what they expected, what they wanted. Instead, a glacial calm began to seep through the cracks in her composure. Fury, white-hot and incinerating, was a luxury she couldn't afford. It needed to be forged into something sharper, colder, more precise. Revenge. Playing the victim was her first gambit. When the anonymous tip about financial irregularities landed on the desk of the easily swayed head of internal audit, a golfing buddy of Damian's, 2 days later, Helena was ready. She met the investigators with wide, frightened eyes, her voice trembling slightly as she professed utter bewilderment. "I just don't understand how this could happen," she stammered, wringing her hands in a carefully rehearsed display of distress. She offered full, seemingly desperate cooperation, subtly reinforcing their perception of her as overwhelmed and out of her depth. Damian played his part perfectly, the concerned, supportive husband, publicly defending her while privately feeding the board doubts. Chloe, the ever-loyal assistant, brought her herbal tea, her eyes wide with faux sympathy that barely masked a triumphant gleam. While they watched the scared rabbit, the fox went to work. Helena became a ghost in the machine. She used forgotten admin credentials, buried deep within the system architecture she herself had helped design years ago, credentials Damian had likely never known existed. She accessed security logs, bypassing the new monitoring protocols Chloe had subtly suggested implementing for her protection. Late-night logins under her username, originating from Chloe's terminal. Digital fingerprints everywhere for those who knew where to look. She planted a microscopic keylogger, a digital spider weaving an invisible web. It captured everything. Damian's messages to Chloe, filled with saccharine endearments and explicit plans for their escape. Chloe's meticulous notes on planting falsified invoices, manipulating authorization trails, and siphoning funds into dummy accounts designed to point unequivocally at Helena. Their entire, arrogant blueprint for her destruction. Reading the transcripts felt like swallowing shards of glass. The depth of their contempt, the casual cruelty of their plan, the sheer stupidity of underestimating her. Each word carved another piece out of her heart, replacing it with hardened resolve. She meticulously gathered evidence like a jeweler collecting diamonds. Original documents versus the clumsy forgeries. Digital timestamps proving Chloe's illicit access during key moments. Backups of their damning communications recovered from cloud archives they thought were deleted. Transaction trails showing their secret transfers, funding their planned escape, and inadvertently mirroring the embezzlement they were framing her for. Every piece was encrypted, stored offline on multiple encrypted drives, one hidden in the hollowed-out heel of an old pair of pumps at the back of her closet, another secured in a safety deposit box under a false name. Simultaneously, she studied Elias Frost, CEO of Vantage Corp, ruthless, pragmatic, allergic to scandal, and obsessed with maximizing value. He wasn't buying Damian's charm, he was buying market dominance. Helena knew his type. He respected competence and despised liability. She formulated her counter-offer. Not an appeal to justice, but a superior business proposition. The pressure intensified as the signing ceremony loomed. Whispers grew louder in the corridors. Damian's concern became more public, tinged with a subtle implication of disappointment. Chloe hovered, a vulture waiting for the final stumble. Helena maintained her mask, pale, slightly withdrawn, clinging to her routines like a lifeline. Inside, she was a coiled spring, her mind a humming supercomputer running simulations of the impending confrontation. The day arrived. The Heart Dynamics headquarters were transformed. A cavernous conference room glittered under crystal chandeliers. Long tables draped in crisp linen held water pitchers and gleaming pens. The air buzzed with the low murmur of suited executives, board members preening, and journalists held respectfully at bay. Damian held court near the head of the table, radiating triumphant energy, shaking hands, flashing his million-watt smile. Chloe, positioned strategically nearby, looked sleek and confident in a sharply tailored dress, the picture of indispensable efficiency. Helena sat slightly apart, near the end of the table reserved for supporting executives. She wore a simple, severe black sheath dress, her posture rigid, her face a carefully composed mask of strained resignation. She clutched a sleek tablet, her knuckles white. To the room, she looked like a casualty awaiting the final blow. Elias Frost arrived, a block of granite in an immaculate suit, flanked by his own stern-faced advisors. Pleasantries were exchanged. Damian launched into a polished speech, extolling the synergistic future and unprecedented value creation of the merger. He spoke of legacy, teamwork, vision. Every word felt like a lie etched into Helena's bones. The moment approached, leather-bound contracts were placed before Damian and Elias Frost. Gold pens were uncapped. Cameras clicked. Damian beamed, picking up his pen, ready to etch his fraudulent triumph into reality. He glanced down the table towards Helena, a fleeting look of pity mixed with profound satisfaction passing over his features. It was the look of a man who believed he had already won. Helena moved. Not with haste, but with deliberate, icy calm. She rose smoothly from her seat, the movement cutting through Damian's oratory like a scalpel. Every eye in the room snapped towards her. A ripple of confusion spread. "Mr. Frost," her voice rang out, clear and steady, devoid of tremor, cutting through the sudden silence. "Before the Heart Dynamics pen touches that contract, I believe Vantage Corp deserves full transparency regarding the assets it intends to acquire, and perhaps a superior alternative." A stunned hush fell. Damian's smile froze, then twisted into disbelief and burgeoning fury. "Helena, what is the meaning of this? Sit down. This is highly inappropriate," he spluttered. Elias Frost, however, didn't react with anger. His sharp, calculating eyes narrowed, fixed on Helena. He raised a hand, silencing Damian. "Ms. Kane?" His voice was a low rumble. "Explain, quickly." Helena stepped forward, her heels clicking decisively on the polished floor. She activated the room's main presentation screen with a tap on her tablet. The Heart Dynamics logo vanished, replaced by a stark professional slide. Vantage is acquiring Heart Dynamics based on projected synergies and declared assets, Helena began, her tone analytical, coldly professional. She pointed to complex charts and graphs that materialized. However, these projections are fundamentally flawed. They fail to account for significant latent liabilities, deliberate financial obfuscation, and the imminent departure of key leadership under adverse circumstances. She paused, letting the implication hang. The true value of Heart Dynamics lies not in its current compromised structure, but in its core technology, its client portfolio, and its operational engine, assets currently undervalued and overshadowed by mismanagement and fraud. Damian surged to his feet. "This is slander, lies, security, remove her." He pointed a shaking finger. Frost ignored him, his gaze locked on Helena. "Fraud, Ms. Kane? These are grave accusations. Proof?" "I offer Vantage Corp a superior path," Helena continued, as if Damian hadn't spoken. A new slide appeared, a proposal for a new entity, Kane Solutions. Acquire the core assets of Heart Dynamics, cleansed of its toxic liabilities and leadership, through this new structure. The price point reflects the true, unencumbered value. She named a figure significantly lower than the merger price, but still substantial. "And I offer irrefutable collateral to guarantee the elimination of those liabilities." She tapped her tablet again. The slide changed. Not to spreadsheets, but to two names in bold, stark font. Damian Hart, Chloe Reed. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Chloe turned deathly pale, shrinking back. Damian's face purpled. "How dare you? This is a deranged fantasy." "The collateral," Helena stated, her voice dropping to a chilling register, "is evidence. Evidence of their conspiracy to embezzle funds, falsify records, and frame me for their crimes to facilitate their escape post-merger. Evidence of their affair, intrinsically linked to the fraud. Evidence meticulously documenting every step of their plan." Chaos erupted. Board members shouted questions. Journalists surged forward, held back by security. Damian lunged towards Helena, sputtering incoherent threats, only to be intercepted by two burly Vantage security personnel Frost had subtly signaled. "Proof, Miss Kane," Frost repeated, his voice cutting through the din. He gestured to a private anteroom. "Now, privately." Helena met his gaze, unwavering. She pulled a small, unassuming USB drive from the hidden compartment of her simple pendant. "Everything is here, encrypted, but the access key is yours upon agreement to my terms." 10 minutes later, Frost emerged from the anteroom, his face grim, his earlier skepticism replaced by cold fury directed not at Helena, but at Damian. He strode to the main table, ignoring the clamor. "Vantage Corp," he announced, his voice booming with finality, "formally withdraws from the proposed merger with Heart Dynamics." He turned his back pointedly on Damian, who stood frozen, his empire crumbling around him. "We will, however, enter immediate negotiations with Ms. Kane regarding her compelling proposal for Kane Solutions. Our due diligence team will commence work immediately." He nodded to Helena. It was a nod of recognition, of respect earned in the crucible of betrayal. As he spoke, uniformed police officers, alerted by an anonymous tip Helena had timed perfectly, entered the room, heading straight for Damian and Chloe. Their protests were drowned out by the flashing cameras and the roar of the scandal breaking in real time. Helena watched dispassionately as Damian was read his rights, his charismatic mask shattered, revealing the petulant, cornered man beneath. Chloe sobbed hysterically, her ambition reduced to handcuffs. The original Heart Dynamics, built on sand and deceit, was functionally dead, dissolving in a whirlwind of exposure and legal jeopardy. Days later, Helena sat in a temporary, functional office space leased by the nascent Kane Solutions. The view was less panoramic, the furniture less opulent. Outside, news vans still lingered near the carcass of Heart Dynamics headquarters. Headlines screamed, "Hart Dynasty crumbles. CFO turns tables in stunning boardroom coup. Hart and assistant face multiple charges." A preliminary agreement with Vantage was in place. Frost, true to his pragmatic nature, recognized the value in Helena's stripped-down, scandal-free entity and her undeniable competence. The deal wasn't the grand legacy Damian had envisioned. It was a lean, hard restart. Helena sipped lukewarm coffee, staring not at the headlines detailing Damian and Chloe's ruin, the financial annihilation complete, their escape fund frozen, their reputations ashes, prosecution looming, but at the clean lines of a spreadsheet outlining Kane Solutions' first independent budget. There was no joy in her victory, only a vast, echoing emptiness and a profound, bone-deep weariness. The luxurious penthouse, the gilded life, the illusion of partnership, all gone, incinerated in the fire of betrayal. But in their place stood something else, something stark, unadorned, and entirely her own. The cold, hard satisfaction of perfect execution. She had been underestimated, betrayed, and marked for destruction. She had responded not with tears, but with superior intellect, meticulous planning, and a vengeance as precise and devastating as a scalpel wielded by a master surgeon. She had used their own weapons, finance and law, and turned them into instruments of their annihilation. The coffee was bitter. The office was quiet. The future was uncertain, but it was hers alone. She saved the budget file, the click of the mouse echoing in the stillness. Outside, the city lights began to flicker on, indifferent to the ruins of one empire and the fragile genesis of another. Helena Kane, the underestimated architect, turned destroyer, turned founder, finally allowed herself a single, cold, razor-thin smile. The weapon had hit its mark. The malice had been merged into nothingness. Now, she would build, on her own terms.
Enjoyed the story? Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one.